So this is my video on how the Old Testament views kingship and how it's regarded. Um, and I guess my argument would be that it's actually regarded very heavily. Kingship is incredibly important and is a theme through the Old Testament that just um, is reoccurring. Um, there are whole books centered around this idea that are framed from this idea if there are kings, like in Judges, there's no kings, or like in the books of Kings one and First Kings and Second Kings, like there are kings, and that's actually what separates these two books is this idea of who is the king. Um, this continues even through the other books, and like seeing how like when David comes into play, like he becomes this king that they deserve, and that Israel has wanted, and there's just this huge yearning and want and this gravitation towards having a king and how important that is. Um, and these can be seen in so many different examples, like for example in Judges 22, the people beg Gideon to rule over them because they want someone to rule over them. These people, they need a ruler, and they need a human ruler. And so Gideon turns them down. He says he is not fit for that, and you can see that in places like Judges 18 and 19. The chapters start off with, in those days Israel has no king, which is almost a lamenting statement. Like there was no king of Israel, and it was a difficult thing to encounter. Um, it was a hard thing for these Israelites, and it was seen as a negative or a bad thing. Those hundreds of years in the book of Judges where there is no king, you can see how everything kind of is sporadic, and there's no real um, time where Israel is ever, properly ruled. And I think that that's why I personally take reading Judges so hard, because like it seems like that book is just so full of wrath because Israel is just continuously turning away from God, and eventually Israel just begs for a king, and God just gives them a king. Um, like in First Samuel 8, Israel begs for a king, not because they have rejected Samuel, but because they have rejected God. God is just no longer, or really, for the most part, has never really actually been seen as their king. Like there's parts and there's sections where Israel is devoted to God as their king, but it seems far and in between. And Israel demands this human king that can rule over them, and this idea that a king is there is such a big deal to them. They're restless without one. Um, so Samuel hears them, but he warns them. He warns them that a human king would not make their lives better. It would just make it more difficult. There would be higher taxes. There would be different things that came into play that would make their lives change, but they don't listen to his advice at all. They desperately need this king, and they don't listen to any sound logic. Because it seems that these Israelites are so narrow mindedly focused on what they need that they forget that God is actually what they need. So in 1 Samuel 12, Samuel responds and tells them that their demand for a king has been fulfilled. But they replaced Yahweh, their God, with a human ruler. And this actually angers God. Um, he warns them. And he warns them if they continue to turn away from God that they will surely perish. It's kind of a sad situation. And then in 2 Samuel 7, we see David as king, and and he's seen as the best king that Israel has ever seen. And I guess like a question that you could ask is why is that? Why is that? Is it that David is the best king that Israel has ever seen? Well, you can see in 2 Samuel 7 that that this chapter highlights that King David acknowledges that the true Lord is Yahweh, and that he, as David, worships this God and no one else. That the true kingship belongs to the Lord. And because of King David's humbleness and his humility, I think that he's able to become this great earthly ruler, because this earthly ruler is submitted to someone who is actually this true king. And I guess the biggest takeaway from all of this is to say that the Old Testament view of kinship is actually so incredibly heavily regarded, and that Israel is kind of so narrow-minded. For me, and I know this gets a little bit political, but I relate this to what's happening in the States right now. The United States thinks that they need a president to change things. They need a president that is different and is able to take them somewhere, forgetting that actually it's Jesus that's their Lord, that actually is reigning over everything. And they put so much into the pocket of the president that when one president screws up, they need to then put everything into this next one. And that's how people like Donald Trump have become into power, is out of this fear of not being properly ruled. So today, when we call Jesus king, I don't think that we fully understand what that actually means. And at least in an earthly sense, to what a king of our lives would be. Because when Jesus came as this king, all these misconceptions of who a king should be was overturned and flipped. And that Jesus being this king is something that we don't understand in a democracy power structure that we live in. People who live in a first world North America are used to democracy. I personally don't have a leader in my life that I can would completely submit to. There's no one like ruling my life. Yeah, I have mentors and coaches who I listen to, but I listen to because it's my choice. But there's no like ruler in my life that's telling me what to do. It's kind of there's laws, of course, but there's no like king. And I don't think I fully understand what it means to have a king in my life, because back then Israel needed a king, and when Jesus finally comes, it's this king, it's this idea that this king is actually their human ruler, but also their godly ruler, and there's so much implication to all of that. And I think this might allude to why it's so difficult for us to process God as complete Lord of our lives. It's something that we don't understand as a Western culture, and something that we've never had to deal with is having someone be a complete ruler of our lives. So this concept of having someone completely rule our lives is non-existent unless you follow God and Christ, and you see that this idea is new and different, and submitting to a king is something that is not something we're necessarily taught, not something we're exemplified. So I guess I can understand and see that kingship actually is such a huge role in the Old Testament, and this idea that Jesus is this final king, is the king, makes a huge difference. So yeah, anyway, that's what my takeaway from how Israel sees kingship, and how that it's actually so heavily regarded, and talking about a king is something that is really a big deal for someone who lives in who is an Israelite, and who's birthed in that nation. Anyway, thanks for watching the video.